How's it going, everyone? This is Jeremy here again with another episode of Commander Quantified. This one's actually going to be a little bit different. We're not going to do quantified theory this week. We're going to be talking about a Rule Zero conversation and what that looks like a little bit more defined. So what I've done is basically, I like acronyms. I think that they're helpful for memory, and that's pretty well proven. So what we've done at this point is put START as our acronym. So at the start of the game, this is the first thing you ask everybody. Before we get started, support me on Patreon if you're able, like the video, subscribe to the channel. Any of those things will be super helpful and will help me keep making these awesome videos for you and get us in some more fun in our favorite game. So we've all been there. You come into your, LGS, your friend's house, whatever, and it's been a long week. The work schedule has been really difficult. You're working overtime or the boss has asked you to do a bunch of extra stuff. You've spent a good amount of time today looking over your commander decks and thinking about how do I want to play tonight? Let's see what we can get in. I just really want to get in some fun games. This has been a really long week. And you show up and you have your regular Rule Zero conversation with your friends, and you find that some expectations really weren't met the way they wanted to be. You kind of leave the night feeling, like you didn't have that much fun. Somebody really pub stomped during a game. The next one, everybody brought out their best, and then it was just a whole lot of interaction. The stack got 6, 7, 8 cards deep at times, and you wind up wanting to play Magic less than when you went that night. I think that is a fundamental failing on the part of our Rule Zero conversations. The way we approach things has to be really intentional. Because we're humans, that's what we do, right? And with my friends in particular, something that we've referred to as like tier levels, right? Or which you'll actually get a video on that in the near-ish future. But the tier levels don't really do justice to what the play experience looks like. So as a result of that, I've come up with this acronym that I'm hoping will be very helpful to you. Let's move on. So what I've got here is just kind of like what we generally look at. From what I've seen with my playgroup, with playgroups online, different stuff like that, when you talk about Rule Zero, the first thing people turn to is power level, which is just simply put bad communication. As you can see, not every deck is a 7. That's not possible. Actually, this entire channel is dedicated to telling you why not every deck is a 7, why not every card deserves to be in a 7 deck, right? You talk about like how many turns you want to play or on what turn your deck wins. But let's face it, with the variability that is Magic the Gathering, and especially Commander, where you have 100 cards that are all different other than basic lands, you have no guarantee that that's how many turns you're going to be playing. And the third is like salt and spice, and I see this a little bit more like, I got some spicy stuff in here, and that is, it's ill-defined, right? Does that mean it's something cool? Does that mean it's something that's like going to be problematic for us? Is it going to make people upset? What does that look like? So I'm going to start with saying this Rule Zero has not worked for me. And if it hasn't worked for you, I'm going to propose this new method to you. So the first letter of START is going to stand for stacks and tax effects. Now, these I differentiate this way, basically. So stacks effects I refer to as more like lockdown pieces. let's say like Stasis or Winter Orb, things that stop players from playing the game, versus tax effects, which are going to say you can play the game, but you have to pay something, right? Now, what the primary question is that we need to be asking when we're talking about this first letter, stacks and tax, is how many pieces am I okay with seeing in this game? What are my expectations for that? And what types of those am I okay with seeing? So here are some examples. I have Opposition Agent, which those who have not played against this card, basically what it does is says if anybody searches their library for anything, I get to do the search and I get to take the card. So when you're approaching this first section, are you okay with seeing cards like this? And the reason I'm approaching it from this direction, how many pieces am I okay seeing, is not we don't play stacks here. It's how many am I willing to see in this game and still have a good time, right? Because generally you can run like 2 or 3 stacks pieces in a deck per player, and you won't run into many of them unless people are tutoring for them. So that's a good example of that. The other one's Archon of Emeria. It's non-basic lands your opponents control come in tapped is the first stacks effect, right? And then the other one is players can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. So that limits the amount of magic that can really be played, which is something I would refer to more as those lockdown type effects. So are you okay with seeing an Archon of Emeria or something similar, right? There are multiple cards with these same types, but I'm just giving you examples here. Are you okay with seeing damage tax effects? So Cemetery Gatekeeper basically will exile a card from a graveyard when it hits the battlefield, and anytime a player, I believe, casts a spell that or plays a land that shares a card type with the exiled card, they take 2 damage. Is that okay? And most people would say yes for Cemetery Gatekeeper. If that's not your jam, don't worry about it. I'm not here to judge that. The other one to consider is Rhystic Study. This is a tax effect, but the tax isn't on the player necessarily because you are able to not pay it. The cost of that is that you're giving your opponent a card each time. Always pay the 1. Don't let the player get away with it. That's just a personal thing. I think that just agree with the rest of the table. We're not going to let this player draw extra cards. We're all just going to play a little bit slower. Because really, in that player, if you pay for every single trigger, is only going to be up 1 mana on everybody else during each turn, but they're not going to be up cards on everybody else each turn. So that's actually really important. Are you okay with seeing cards like Rhystic Study at the table? Another one is going to be a... words. I have words. I can see it in my brain. It's the new 1-cost white creature. But most of the time when you're talking about that one, Esper Sentinel, sorry, that's the word. So Esper Sentinel is the 1-cost that basically does the same thing as Rhystic Study, except for it's on a 1/1 artifact creature, so it's much easier to remove if needed, which most people will take pity on you for playing white in general, and you'll get to draw a lot more cards off of it than you probably should. So all of that in total, here's what we're looking at. We're looking at what types of stacks and tax effects are you okay seeing, and how many pieces are you okay seeing in the game in total. And that is the first letter of start. Next, we would have a conversation about tutors. That would be the second letter in start. So the question that we're asking when we're talking about tutors is how many tutors do I run? And this is for your opponents to kind of gauge what power level you're playing at. Usually higher tutor count means higher power level. And there are many different types of tutors. It is a card or effect that searches a player's library for a card other than a basic land card and makes it more accessible. So like Vampiric Tutor puts a card to the top. Entomb puts a card in the graveyard. Demonic Tutor puts a card in your hand, and let's say There's got to be a red one or two that puts it in exile. Like you can cast it until end of turn. Golos kind of does that, right? But we don't play Golos anymore. Sad day for my buddy. Anyway, how many tutors do I run is the question you need to answer for everybody else at the table. And some examples of tutors: mystical, demonic, goblin engineer, and natural order. So those would be some just really basic ones. Natural order in particular tutors to the battlefield, but really density is what you're looking for, because certain tutors become like, hey, if I have 5 different cards that can tutor for Toxic Deluge, I have 5 Toxic Deluges and 5 of probably any other card in my deck. And that really increases the consistency, which in higher tiers, right, like if you look at some of my tier rankings, basically tiers 4 and 5 really want that level of consistency, but anything below that, you're embracing the variance that is the format of Commander, and probably running fewer and fewer tutors. My playgroup and I have agreed that 4 tutors is probably a good number to run if you want to cap yourselves at a 4. That has been extraordinarily effective. We run a lot more card draw as a result of that. So basically the tutor cards have just been replaced with card draw, which is embracing the variance but also kind of circumventing it at the same time. So all that to say, tutors. How many do I run? Answer that question before you start the game. All right, next we're going to talk about acceleration. So specifically, what we're talking about when we talk about acceleration is how much fast mana is the expectation, right? Pretty much every deck runs like Sol Ring, but not every deck runs Mana Crypt or Chrome Mox or Jeweled Lotus or anything like that. And saying how much fast mana, basically like your 0 and 1 mana ramp, how much do you expect to see in a given game? So if you are going around the table and you say, okay, well, fast mana I expect to see maybe like 1 or 2, if like 2 players happen to get a Sol Ring. And this is just, again, setting solid expectations for what's happening around the table. And if you do that, then you're going to have a much better game. People aren't going to completely pop off on turn 1, and you're going to find it being more enjoyable, because this kind of relates to how many turns you expect the game to go, which we'll talk about in a minute here. All right, and the R, we're going to talk about removal. So removal is very valuable. It is something that we're going to talk about in terms of generating advantage in a game. However, if you are looking at like lower tiers, again, like we're talking your 3, 2, 1, those low tiers, then you are going to want to ask this question, which is how much spot removal do I expect to see, and how many board wipes do I expect to see? And when you're talking about that, basically the templating that most people will ascribe to has been popularized by the command zone. Not saying it's wrong, just saying that's generally what people are following. And the spot removal tends to be around 12 pieces for a deck. And the board wipes tend to be lower, something like 2 or 3. So when you're talking about that as far as percentage of deck, right? So there are 400 total cards between all players. And let's say each of them are running that 12. Then per game, if it goes 8 turns, right, you can expect to see approximately 2 to 3 removal spells per player if you're not accounting for a good amount of card draw, right? My playgroup tends to have more removal available because we run more card draw as a result of our other tutor rule. So, how many pieces of spot removal do I expect to see in this game? Generally, it's going to be like between 2 and 3 per player. If you're like, I'd rather see a low interaction game, I really only want to see like 1. So let's say everybody's running like 8 instead of 12 pieces of spot removal. That would be a possibility. Same thing with how many board wipes. There are certain decks that function a lot better with a large quantity of board wipes. So maybe if you put out there that your expectation is, hey, I really only want to see like 1 or 2 board wipes this entire game, that the person who is running this, Zergo Helm Smasher, which is a deck that I have been meaning to build for a long time, Zergo Helm Smasher Voltron, since it's indestructible, you can run probably like 10 or 12 board wipes, and Zergo just dodges it as long as it's on your turn. So establish that expectation early on in the game. Some examples of those board wipes, that spot removal, I just have Dam, Assassin's Trophy, and Supreme Verdict as possible options. Really what we're looking for here is quantity, right? What are you looking to see in this game? And then other players can kind of like go around that. You can get to a point where the players are compromising, right? And that's going to be very helpful for you. So that is removal. Now we're going to talk about turns. And so turns of play is really what I'm talking about, not necessarily extra turns, although if you kind of like look at that, you can see I put time stretch on here. Taking extra turns, not that big a deal as far as most players are okay with that in general, as long as you're not like going infinite turns. That's kind of dumb, or most people will scoop at that point, which is pretty fine. How many turns do you expect to play this game? My guideline is I want to play at minimum 6 to 8 turns, right? Somewhere in that general area, which really weeds out those early game wins. So people are not going to pull out their, tier 5 and 4 decks, probably. They're going to pull out their tier, maybe their low tier 4 and high tier 3 would be in that area. But generally, if you say, hey, I want to be playing like 10 turns this game or 12 turns this game, people are going to pull out different decks. And not saying like what the difference is when you're talking about like the original, right? You aren't telling people what turn you're going to win on. You're going to say, I would like to play this many turns, which is actually a very different answer to the question. And how much time do you want the game to take? Are we okay with table talk? Is that fine? Are we focusing in on this game and we're trying to jam in as many as humanly possible? Maybe. But yeah, we're talking about how many turns, how much time do we expect to play. This can kind of relate up to board wipes, like how much time you expect to play. If you want to play longer games, more board wipes are usually going to help with that, which is an interesting kind of situation there. So when you're talking about, so this is the last letter, right? This is the end of your starting conversation. How many turns do you expect to play? I think that in total, turns is potentially one of the more valuable ones. Like you can go over everything else because different decks will play that differently. But how many turns you expect to play during this game, or how many turns you expect to get during this game, is going to really clue your opponents into what you're looking for, rather than saying my deck wins on turn X, right? My encouragement then is more geared toward developing your expectations for the game rather than focusing on the deck itself. You've already done all the work for the deck, right? So all you're doing is selecting a deck that's going to fit in with what everybody else is saying at the table. Yeah, I think that's where we're going to stop on this point. And I think that our takeaways, and this kind of is just what I was addressing in the last point, is establish healthy, clear expectations. This is valuable in many different facets of life, but in Commander in particular, we are doing what we were talking about. It's Friday night. You've had a long week. It's been really rough. You just want to sit down and have a few fun games and jam in maybe a win or two if you're lucky. But really what you're there to do is spend time with your friends. And how you have fun is you establish healthy, clear expectations at the beginning. So have fun. These are the takeaways. I have this card available. I'm going to post this on my page, and it'll be on Discord as just like a pinned thing. I may even pin it to the top of my Twitter, because this is where we want to be in our format. We want to be establishing healthy, clear expectations. We want to be having fun in every single game of Magic that we play, because we spend a lot of time and money consuming content and buying cards, and figuring out how to make our decks work. And especially when we're talking about introducing new players to the format. That's so important, is having a fun, well thought out game. All right, we're going to move on to the last little bit here. Thank you so much for listening. Just a second here. All right, well, thanks for hanging on until the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be handing out little cards with this particular acronym on it that are also going to be treasure tokens on the back at Command Fest Bellevue. So if you are there, ask me for one. I will be wearing a t-shirt with my logo on it. So you will see that lion and the number field in the circle. Totally not Iron Man derivative. It's fine. Don't worry about it. So yeah, and if you're able, like the video, subscribe to the channel. If you like my content, I'm going to be putting out a lot more. I'm actually recording tonight 3 more videos. So I'm really cranking out content. There's going to be a ton of stuff, and support me on Patreon, because that's going to be a good amount of that content. Patrons get early access to all these episodes. This episode was already up on Saturday. This will be Monday is the earliest you can watch this. So for the general public. And if you have any questions or comments or anything like that, you can always just @ me on Twitter. CQCrunch is my handle, and I will respond as soon as humanly possible. I'm also on Discord under Commander Quantified. And yeah, thanks so much for watching the channel. Thanks for supporting it. I hope to see you soon.